The polls are in. The Iran war, as some people call it, is possibly the least popular war that we've engaged in recent decades, especially since World War II. But is this going to be enough to give the Democrats a win in the midterms, especially since they are the second least popular thing in the country right now? My name is Ben Corriveau, and welcome to my show. Okay, start off with, I do want to talk about the Islamic terrorist attempted terrorist attack in New York City, which obviously there's been a lot of spin going on with this story because you can't say that some Muslims are bad. Not all of them are, but some of them are, and as their religion inherently calls them to be radicals, it's not surprising that these things happen. And like I said, I'm not even completely against Muslims. It's just some of them take it to the extreme, which their religion inherently calls for. So let's get into it. First, we have Mayor Zohran Mamdani. So before we even get into this whole situation, let me explain to you what happened without specifying any of the terms. So, like I said already, it was an Islamic terrorist attack. I'll give you that. But outside of that, the only information I'm going to give you is that there was a protest in New York City. There was a counter protest in New York City. At this time, the Islamic radical went through the counter protest to throw homemade explosive devices at the original protest. So that is, I think it's fair to say that everybody can confirm that the person who threw the bombs is wrong and that whatever the two protests were about aren't necessarily important in this situation. But that's not what Democrats and the fake news would have you believe. I mean, first we have, like I said, Zohran Mamdani. This is his ex post referring to the incident. Yesterday, white supremacist Jake Lang organized a protest outside Gracie Mansion. Just for context, this is Zohran Mamdani's official residence, rooted in bigotry and racism. Such hate has no place in New York City. It is an affront to our city's values and the unity that defines who we are. What followed was even more disturbing. Violence at a protest is never acceptable. The attempt to use an explosive device and hurt others is not only criminal, it is reprehensible and the antithesis of who we are. I want to thank the brave men and women of the NYPD who acted quickly to keep New Yorkers safe. Our officers ran toward danger without hesitation, demonstrating once again the courage and dedication it takes to protect this city every single day. My administration is closely monitoring the situation and I remain in close contact with our police commissioner. So, this is the spin that they're going for. It's not about the people who actually threw the bombs or anything. It's about the initial protest, which it was an anti-Islam protest. I can give you that information now that I've made my point. I mean, whether you like it or not, it was an anti-Islam protest. That doesn't justify violence against them, and it certainly doesn't warrant demonizing them just because you disagree with them and essentially blaming them for what happened in the first place. And you see this all the time, especially with the Charlie Kirk assassination. I know it was a bit more with the first Trump assassination, but that's been going on as well. I've had discussions with people regarding this, and it's insane that you would blame the person who people are trying to kill for them trying to kill them just because they disagree with what they're saying. But we had that. We had NBC News. This was very interesting because their headline, device ignited at Gracie Mansion protest was an improvised explosive, NYPD says. This is the headline. So like I said in one of my previous videos, most people only read the headlines. They don't actually go into the article. So that right there is already misleading because it doesn't give any information about who actually perpetrated it or anything. I mean, at this point you could just say, oh, well, so somebody, it was the protest that they lit the device and they tried to blow people up, which isn't what happened. And even then, right below that, they have as the subheading, two men were taken into custody after one of two devices was ignited during an anti-Islam demonstration and a counter protest outside the mayor's residence. Again, this is how they frame the story. They're framing it to make it seem like the anti-Islam protesters were the ones who did it, which is a complete inversion of the truth. If anything, the people who actually committed this act of terror or attempted to commit this act of terrorism, even though it is still terrorism, I just want to be more specific here. They tended to be on the side of the people counter protesting. So, I mean, it's just a complete inversion of reality. And even, I do believe that eventually in here, they do get into it. But even, because I'm just scrolling through quick just to double check that, and I'm still not seeing anything about the fact that they were part of the anti-Islam, or I'm sorry, that they were attempting to attack the anti-Islam protest instead of just throwing them. And I know some people have actually even implied that this was targeted at Zohran Mamdani, which I'll get into that a little bit later, because this is all together, actually. I'll just get to it now. Why not? So we have CNN's Abby Phillips, who we knew all the facts at this point that it was an Islamist terrorist attack. She came out on air after all these facts came out and says, quote unquote, 2 Republicans say Muslims don't belong here after an attempted terror attack against New York's Mayor Zohran Mamdani, and the House Speaker Mike Johnson says nothing really to condemn these comments. Again, this is framing, like, they're all trying to frame this to make the anti-Islam and the Republicans the bad people, which, like I said, no matter what side you're on, it shouldn't be a matter of who was protesting. It should just be universally condemned that somebody attempted to bomb this protest, because we have the right to free speech. We have the right to assembly here, whether you like it or not. I know that a lot of lefties don't like what I say and they come after me, but I'm like, I have the right to say it, just like you have the right to say it. And if you want to actually improve society, how about you actually use that right to engage with my arguments instead of just calling me names or whatever? And it's the same thing here. They're just trying to blame people without any actionable information. I mean, even here, this is also from CNN. This happened, I believe, prior to that clip going viral, where they put up a post saying, quote unquote, 2 Pennsylvania teenagers crossed into New York City Saturday morning for what could have been a normal day, enjoying the city during abnormally warm weather. But in less than an hour, their lives would be drastically changed, as the pair would be arrested for throwing homemade bombs during an anti-Islam protest outside of Mayor Zohran Mamdani's home. Here's what we know so far. So they're minimizing the situation by saying, oh, they came into New York City on a Saturday morning for what could have been a normal day. I mean, remember, this is this year is the 25th anniversary of 9/11, which killed over 3,000 people in the Twin Towers by Islamic terrorists. So basically portraying this in a better light than it actually is extremely ridiculous and irresponsible by these people who are supposed to be informing us. They're not informing us, they're misinforming us. But we have that, and then they did issue an apology. They said, a post regarding the 2 individuals arrested for throwing homemade bombs outside of New York City Mayor Zohran Mamdani's home failed to reflect the gravity of the incident, thereby breaching the editorial standards we require for all our reporting. It has therefore been deleted. Which is particularly funny to me because, like I said, already Abby Phillip from CNN made, I'm not going to say a similar mistake, but she made a statement that had the same effect. It was actually a bit more radical, in my opinion, than this, because this was just basically saying that it was a normal day, and then all of a sudden the bombs just happened to show up in their hands because they were being attacked by the anti-Islam protests. They were offended or whatever. But no, I mean, that's, like I said, that's not what happened. I told you the facts of the situation. These people should be universally condemned. I don't care if you're, like, even if you are Islamic, these people are making it look bad for you. Like, isn't that just common sense? You should condemn this stuff. But even the lefties can't get over this, because there's actually a clip. This guy recently was on Michael Knowles' bar fight. His name is William Masterson. He's a comedian. I am going to play his clip, but he was the one that the terrorist jumped over to throw the explosive, and his response is exactly what I said. It's
from outside and then tell everyone else. That's me in the video getting a bomb thrown over my head. Let me just give you some context for what was happening. So this was at a rally hosted by white supremacist Jake Lang. He's a domestic terrorist from January 6th, pardoned by Donald Trump. He was holding an anti-Muslim rally when this guy jumped over me and committed an act of terrorism. That sounds confusing. Let me start over. So Jake Lang was holding the rally. He's known for three things: being a domestic terrorist from January 6th, pardoned by Donald Trump, losing to the letter S, and as we found out today, grooming 15-year-old girls. Jake Lang was holding this rally saying things like this: America is a white Christian country. If you're saying America is for white Christian men, you're a white supremacist. Now, I really want to be clear that I made a huge mistake in not taking cover after this explosive device was thrown. If you're at a public event and someone throws what looks like an explosive device, you're not a wimp for taking cover. We were counter-protesting, making Jake Lang look like the idiot that he is, when these two idiots came along and committed an act of terrorism. They could not have done more to legitimize Jake Lang's white supremacist talking points. They literally threw the bomb over my head while I was talking about inclusion. The CIA should definitely be paying them at this point. I just want to reiterate that I was not practicing safety that day. I could have been killed, and that weighs very heavy on both me and my family. And all that being said, I'm not going to use this as an excuse to be a xenophobic bigot. Elon Musk and all of right-wing media are having a field day right now because I am choosing inclusion and not bigotry. I still stand by my original point, which is I'm a native New Yorker. I was born and raised in New York. New York City is for everyone, except for terrorists who throw bombs and goat-fucking white supremacists like Jake Lang.
Okay, so as you can see, his entire focus is on Jake Lang. He's a white supremacist and everything. And I'm not gonna, like, if you don't like Jake Lang, go ahead. I don't care. I don't have any eggs in that basket. I don't care if you like him or not. Criticize him all you want. That doesn't justify the violence. And even then, even getting past that point, he even goes on and says that he is not going to use this instance of violence to be quote unquote xenophobic or bigoted. It's not xenophobic or bigoted to recognize that you have a religion that, one, inherently calls for violence against anybody who doesn't follow that religion, but two, there are actually a lot of extremists who follow that. And I'm not, like I said, I'm not saying that all of them do. There are some reasonable Muslims, and they should have the right to practice their religion freely. The problem is when you have such a high proportion of these people committing these extremist attacks, especially in a time right now with what's going on in Iran, it's a security concern, and we should be concerned about that. I mean, it's completely rational to be that way. So I really can't believe that I can't believe that I had to be correct in that situation, because you would think that basically almost dying from Islamic terrorism would at least make you realize that, yes, we may have a problem there, but I guess not. But despite that, we actually had quite a few instances of violence this week. We actually had in Old Dominion University, there was a active shooter situation where there was an ex-National Guard member who recently got out of jail. He previously had been imprisoned in 2016 because of his links to ISIS. So again, a radical Muslim or a radical Islamist, or however you want to refer to it. And yeah, he went onto campus and shot up the place. As far as I'm aware, there was only one person killed. He was the ROTC instructor. I'll put up his image and name because obviously I do want to have you guys pray for him, because it's horrible that had to happen. But that happened. Luckily, there were several ROTC students in the area that were able to subdue and take out the assailant. Same day, there was a Michigan synagogue that was attacked. And in this instance, it was a man, he drove into a synagogue with explosives in his car. I believe he also had a rifle with him, and he luckily enough, nobody was killed. I believe that the security guard who shot and killed him was actually injured, but like I said, nobody's dead at the moment, which is great that that happened. And actually, there's reporting that they recently had DHS training on active shooter situations, which prepared them for instances like this, which is great. And this one is also appearing that it may be Islamist. And the reason I say maybe is because a lot of the reporting on this is saying that there's no motive yet. One thing I did see, and I do want to highlight this, is that New York Post has this article up. It just went out today that apparently his brothers were members of Hezbollah, which is another Islamist terrorist organization over in the Middle East. So there's that. The biggest motivation that I have seen thus far is that he had family in Lebanon that were killed in the Israeli airstrikes, and so this was retaliation for Iran. Like I said, take this all with a grain of salt. It is fairly recently because this just happened yesterday, but I do want to give you guys all the information so you can come up with whatever opinion you want on this situation. But it is looking like it may have been Islamist, or at the very least related to the Iran conflict that we're in right now. We also had today a UVA bomb threat, so University of Virginia had a bomb threat in the libraries, and luckily there was no bombs found as far as I'm aware, but obviously this is more potential violence. As far as I'm aware, like I said, no bombs were found. I haven't seen anything regarding any suspects, but I'll put stuff out if I see anything, and I'll probably talk about it next week if it's still in the news, but we'll see about that. We also had a driver detained after attempting to drive through the U.S. barricades at the White House, which kind of crazy. Again, no motive there as far as I'm aware. They haven't released anything publicly. I know the guy was detained, but no public information is available yet. So it's kind of hard for me to give you any additional information. But with all these various acts of terrorism, and don't even forget that last week, I even talked about this, was the Austin bar shooting, where that was another pro-Iran Islamist who shot up a Austin bar. I believe he killed 3 people and injured several others. I don't remember the counts off the top of my head, but you can go watch my video from last week to actually see that story. But it's getting pretty dangerous. And I have some thoughts on that, but I want to wait until a little bit later to get to that. But with all this violence, you would think that the Democrats would let up on their DHS shutdown, because this is actually affecting the security of Americans. Not only is it in terms of actual violence happening in the streets of America for these Islamist terrorists, really, but we're also having TSA concerns as obviously it's spring break season, which it's a concern for me because obviously a lot of people travel here, especially young Americans, which makes them prime targets for, especially airports, makes them prime targets for terrorists. And this is causing problems because right now we're having lines of up to 3 hours, and this was reported March 9th, so a few days ago, 4 days ago, so that was Monday that this was reported that they were having these problems. And like I said, it's spring break season, so I would expect these to be going on for a bit longer. And this is really problematic, especially because they're having staffing shortages, which means that there are less eyes able to check security, making it's one very inconvenient for travelers, but it's also very problematic because we are living in a situation where heightened security is necessary, and Democrats don't want to fund it. So I mean, I'm just giving you the facts here. You do what you want with them, but it's really important that DHS gets funded so we start protecting Americans again, because this is just ridiculous that people need to sit through this and be concerned about their safety. I mean, that's already pretty crazy, but there was also another big thing that happened today, or this week, I'm sorry, not today, was there was a controversy over Pete Hegseth and the Department of War, because in the full year of 2025, Pete Hegseth and the Department of War spent a lot of money. I just want to get the exact amount. So they say billions of dollars here. This is from TMZ. They spent $93 billion starting in September of 2025 through December, which sounds crazy, especially for me. I mean, I'm in favor of reducing a lot of the government size in spending so that way Americans actually, their money actually goes to things that they support and actually help Americans as opposed to just funding things that we don't need. Because then we can get lower taxes and it essentially increases the autonomy of the individual and improving our economic our economic abilities as a society. But if you actually look into this, so this is a quote from the TMZ article. Hegseth's DoD, because they still refer to it as the Department of Defense. It is the Department of War now, but getting past that. They needed to spend the money to keep their current funding moving forward. This is common government policy. If you don't use all your funds, then you will get less funds in the following year, which I think that should be happening. I think that we should be cutting back funds, and I think that we should be discouraging agencies from actually spending the same amount as they spent last year. But that's not how things are. I live in the world of reality. I don't live in the world of make-believe. So that's how it works. So they were attempting to maintain funding. But let's see what they actually spent the money on. So $6.9 million for lobster tail, $2 million for Alaskan king crab, and $15.1 million for ribeye steak. There's a few other ones. I mean, $1 million for salmon, $140,000 for donuts, $124,000 for ice cream machines. So this sounds crazy. And I can see why liberals are losing their minds over this because they don't actually think about these things. So let's take, for example, you're sitting at your home, you have $93 billion that you need to spend, and you buy $6.9 million worth of lobster tail. Are you going to eat that all yourself? I mean, like, seriously. Are you going to eat that yourself? Even if you have, well, let's say you have a family of 10. So you have your spouse, and then your 8 kids. That's going to last you a long time. That's an insane amount of lobster tails. Not to mention all the other food that he purchased. Because you know where it actually went? It went to the soldiers that are fighting for us in serving overseas. I mean, this is like so easily debunked as as not being a big deal. It's the way that the government operates in the first place. And second of all, it's benefiting our troops. So I don't necessarily have a problem with that. Like I said, I do wish that we could cut back spending, and I do think that we should incentivize government organizations to not spend the same amount year over year and actually decrease their spending year over year. But if they're going to do it, I would much rather it actually support Americans and the brave men and women who serve us, because this is like I really don't have a problem with this whatsoever. And I think that most Americans don't. The only people who do are the people who are so anti-Trump that they're willing to let the whole country burn down because they hate him. But getting aside from that, we do have some updates on Iran, especially the people serving over there. So first thing that was fairly big news, luckily ABC just corrected it actually tonight, literally right before I went on air. But ABC published a story where they were warning about where the FBI had issued a statement to California. I believe that it was the California Police Departments. I'm not entirely certain about that. Yeah, it was California Police Departments, where they were warned about a potential Iran strike, which obviously that could be a concern. I don't think it's necessarily pressing because Iran would have to sail an unmarked boat across the Pacific to get close enough to the shore of California to be able to launch the drones. So it's not impossible, it's improbable, but it's better to be prepared than not. And this was issued in February, just so you're aware. This was issued before the whole Iran conflict in the first place. So there's that. And ABC just got a hold of it and published it the other day. And they intentionally, I believe it was intentionally because I don't know how else you would mistake this, but they put in a quote from the actual affidavit, but they left out one word, which is kind of changes the whole framing of it. So the quote that they published was, "We recently acquired information that as of early February 2026, Iran allegedly aspired to conduct a surprise attack using unmanned aerial vehicles from an unidentified vessel off the coast of the United States homeland, specifically against unspecified targets in California, in the event the U.S. conducted strikes against Iran." So that sounds like it was a definite, this was going to happen, and the government didn't warn the people. Which, if that were true, that would be a whole scandal because the American people should have known about this so they could actually prepare properly for any event that may cause this. Because obviously, this would be horrific if it killed civilians. But if you look at the actual quote, they left out the word unverified. This information wasn't verified. So the FBI received this tip, but it wasn't verified that it was actually correct, which means that there was no need to actually warn the citizens. You want to say that they should have, okay, that's fine, but there was no pressing need to actually warn it because it was unverified. I do think that they should have probably spent some time verifying that information and telling the American people, but they didn't. And like I said, it wasn't pressing because it wasn't, they had no idea if it was true or not. So that's why, and I wouldn't be surprised if upon further inspection, they found out that it was false, and that's why they didn't tell the American people. So, I mean, this is all the things that you have to consider when you're reading this stuff. Like, you have to think about what's happening in the moment, what may have changed since then, because, I mean, this is a month old that this affidavit was released, that this affidavit was issued in the first place. So, it just seems crazy to me to imply that the government was, like, it's just bad reporting. And this is what happens when you have a media that they've lost their purpose. They don't care about actually telling you the truth. Even a lot of conservative sources aren't necessarily trying to tell you the truth. Some of them are, some of them aren't. I'll leave that up to you to decide which ones are and which ones aren't. But this is why you need critical thinking. And this is actually why one of the big things I try to do is anytime I can find a source for information, I try to get it from a left-wing or a more moderate source. So that way I don't have people telling me that I'm biased in my information, because I'm pointing to the information that they follow and showing them that they're wrong. But yeah, so there was that. We also had a new update where Iran named their new supreme leader. It's the previous Ayatollah's son, Mojtaba. So like I said in one of my previous episodes, I don't speak Arabic or any of the Middle Eastern dialects, so I'm very bad with pronunciations over here. He's been named the new supreme leader, and like I said, I'll put the article up here, but you can see that the death toll of U.S. service members at the point of this article releasing rose to 7. Just prior to me going on air, there was another one of our aircraft where it crashed and we lost another 6. I don't know if men or women because they haven't released the names yet, but please pray for all these people. I mean, I hate having to talk about all this violence going on because it's just awful that it's happening in the first place, especially all the American lives that are being lost. But it's what's happening. This is the real world, so this is what I have to talk about. I wish it weren't so, but that's how it is. So that happened. Like I said, the new supreme leader was named, but there's some questions going around about that new leader because after being named, there were reports that the new supreme leader was in the area of one of, I don't recall if it was an Israeli or if it was a U.S. airstrike, but he was in the area of one of those strikes. He was reportedly injured, and then some sources are saying that he died. He succumbed to injuries from that airstrike, which may or may not be true. Like I said, I haven't seen any information confirming it. I haven't seen any information denying it. And it's certainly suspicious because the people in Iran actually haven't seen their leader in public, which this isn't proof of anything. And I do want to be clear about that, because he could just be hiding because he doesn't want to be killed, or he could be hiding because, or he could just not be public because he's dead. It could be either one. You can form your own opinions on that. I'm not going to tell you what to think, but this is what's happening. So he may be dead, he may not be. It's definitely interesting, and I think that if we were able to confirm that he was dead, this would change public perception on the war, because right now it's actually by far one of the least popular wars that we've ever had. But before I get into that, I do want to talk about some of the economic factors that are causing Americans to be against this war. One of the biggest things, obviously, out of this is the Strait of Hormuz, where there's a significant amount of the world's oil comes from. And from CNN, this conflict has been resulting in a historic disruption of oil production, obviously, because if you can't get oil out of the country, then it's pretty much useless to the rest of the world. So obviously, with less of a supply, demand staying the same, prices are going to increase. And we've actually been seeing this. So on Monday, they broke through the $100 barrier. But according to the CNN article, crude oil prices eventually ended up coming back down. So they rose to nearly $120 a barrel. And then the next day, prices dropped to around around $94, $95, which is reportedly up 4 point. Like I said, all this is from CNN. Believe it if you want. You can do your own research. I'm going to provide as much information as I can. But it's looking like $94.77 a barrel, up 4.3% for Monday. And the international benchmark rose 6.8%, and it settled in about 98.96. So prices may have gone up, but they did drop down. And a lot of this is speculated to be because of Trump's announcement that the war is almost over. If you want to believe that, believe it. If not, like I said, I don't care what you think. I'm trying to give you the information so you can have an informed opinion on all these topics. But one thing that I do think is also interesting to note is the various reasons that public perception is changing on this conflict. And right now I'm looking at the YouGov survey, because they actually, YouGov does a great job with a lot of their surveys. I like using them as sources, so you'll probably see a lot of these, but I do have 3 graphs that I want to talk about in particular. First of these is that over half of Americans were not surprised that Donald Trump ordered strikes on Iran, which by the title, like I said in one of my previous videos, this attack isn't very surprising, particularly because of what Trump has said for decades now. I mean, going back to 1980, I would say. If you want to talk about Iran specifically, I think 2011 is the earliest that he's done it. Like I said, I talked about this in one of my previous videos, so you can go watch it. But, I mean, it's fairly clear that this was going to happen at some point. That's why most Americans aren't surprised by it. But one thing that I do think is fascinating about this is that we have 35% of Democrats that were at least somewhat surprised by this course of action, which to me is very telling, because Democrats are the ones who have been saying that Trump is going to get us into World War III since like 2015, 2016, pretty much right after Trump started running for president. They started claiming he was going to start World War III, but all of a sudden they're surprised that he's conducting military action. So this indicates that they didn't actually believe that Trump was going to start World War III. They just said that because they wanted to make him less electable. Okay, the next graph that I wanted to talk about was that the majority of Americans say that Trump should have sought congressional authorization before striking Iran, which you can see the graphs here. Obviously, it's very partisan, with 93% of Democrats in favor of that, 20% of Republicans against that, and about 56% of independents agreeing with that statement, which, to me, the Constitution says that in order to declare war, that is Congress's position. And that's the way that it should be. But if you look at history, every single military conflict since after World War II, so post World War II, has not been done with an official declaration of war by Congress, which like I said, I think that that's a problem. It needs to be sorted out. Like we need to get back to Congress actually issuing declarations of war as opposed to the president just unilaterally deciding we're going to go into a country and start a war with them. The final graph that I want to show you is that most Americans do not expect the war in Iran to end within a month. Now, I think that this is a fair assessment just because, I mean, even going off of what Trump said, he said 4 to 5 weeks. So that does leave some wiggle room for there to be a little bit more than a month, which I'm more in that camp. I do believe that it's going to be, like I said, if it's between 5 to 8 weeks, I would still be not necessarily against it, but if it lasts longer than that, that's when my interest is going to start waning in favor of this, because obviously I don't want to get into a long drawn out war. And this already is very unpopular, especially in a midterm year. It's very dangerous to be doing something this unpopular, especially when it's make or break whether you win this election or not. So that's certainly important, especially because New York Times has this poll out that the Iran attack is by far, not necessarily by far, it's 6% less popular than the previously least popular intervention that occurred, which was the Libya intervention by Barack Obama in 2011. That had 47% approval. You can see all the numbers up here. World War II was at 97%. Afghanistan, 92%. That makes sense because it was after. Both of these were after we were attacked, whether that was by Japan and Pearl Harbor in World War II, or in Afghanistan, it was after 9/11. Those make sense. Persian Gulf War, 82%. Panama, 80%. The Iraq War, 76%. Korean War, 75%. Kosovo, 58%. Grenada, 53%. And Libya at 47%. Now, the Iran War is at 41% currently. So it's definitely not something that I believe we necessarily should have done in terms of the political optics of it, because we really need to win. Republicans need to win this election. I really don't want Democrats to win this election, because if they do, they're basically going to throw out the rest of Trump's presidency. He's going to be labeled in history as a failed president. And I wouldn't be surprised if they use that to turn around in 2028 and actually win an election, because it's just not going too well. Like, to be completely honest, if most Americans are against this, then that's really, really hurting the image of the Republican Party. But I'm hoping that if we can close this out in what Trump said, 5 to 8 weeks, or he said 4 to 5, I believe 5 to 8 is a more reasonable estimate. But if we can close it out within that time frame and achieve our goals, I do think that that'll give us a boost in the polls. It's just a crazy risk to take, especially now, being so close to the midterms. But we'll see how that goes. I mean, another thing that I do believe that is drawing that is all the recent attacks on it. And this is something that I think is really important, because this conflict, war, whatever you want to call it, is hitting much closer to home than most previous conflicts. Because while we weren't attacked prior to us getting involved in it, we are getting attacked now. And it's not just our men and women overseas who are being attacked. It's civilians in the U.S. that are being killed because of this. And I don't necessarily know if that's going to turn public opinion against the war even further. I believe it will. But there is something to be said that potentially this will get people more interested in the war. Because I have seen some people saying that interest or support for the conflict is increasing over time. Some people are saying it's decreasing. It all depends on who you're listening to. So if you want to go out and find that information, go ahead and find it. But it is certainly important to recognize that that is the reality of the situation, is that civilians are being killed, which in my mind means that we should be going a little bit harder over there. if they're willing to send people over here or call their sleeper cells to kill civilians instead of targeting instead of targeting our military, which are actually prepared for this stuff, they're targeting the people who are just going about their everyday lives. Some of them might even be against the war in the first place, and they're going out and killing them in this. Like, it's just insane. So there's that. I mean, I do think that there's one big thing that's going on here that a lot of people aren't recognizing too, is that there is a huge gap between what people say that they want and what they actually want. And I think this is best evidenced by those numbers I just shared on the public perception of the Iran conflict. It's by far the least popular military conflict that we've been in since World War II, at least. And but it's just funny because these same people tend to say simultaneously that Iran cannot have a nuclear weapon. So how do you guarantee that without military action? So I do want to bring up, I do want to bring up Michael Knowles. He's one of my favorite commentators out there. He put up a poll in June of 2025 where he asked two questions. The first, should the U.S. go to war with Iran? And these are both X polls. He had 12,265 votes. Of this, 90% of people said no, with only 10.3% saying yes, that we should have gone to war with Iran. And this is last year, June of 2025. His second question was, should President Trump allow Iran to develop a nuclear weapon? Similar amount of votes, so this was 12,162 votes. 80% said no, whereas 19.3% said yes. So Americans don't want us to go to war with Iran, but they don't believe that Iran should be allowed to have a nuclear weapon. And now, to me, this is an indication of modernity in reality. I mean, most Americans, their lives are so far away from the things that they actually interact with. Like, most Americans now don't know where their food comes from. Like, they don't interact with the people who provide them their food. And to me, this is an indication that they don't want to see how the sausage is made. Look, just use a phrase. I mean, it seems like they want the job done, but they don't want to know how that job is being done, because if they see that job being done, then they're going to complain about it. And this is best evidenced by a Reuters poll. This was from February 18th to the 23rd of this year. It surveyed 4,638 adults nationwide. And we have the two questions. Do you approve of Trump's handling of deportations? And second question, do you support deporting unauthorized immigrants? So if you take a look at the first question, do you approve of Trump's handling of deportations? 40% say yes, whereas 58% say no, whereas the rest skip the question. In contrast, we have, do you support deporting unauthorized immigrants? 61% said yes, whereas 35% said no. Like I said, this indicates that they want the job done, they just don't want to see the job being done, which it's kind of hard to actually strike that balance nowadays, especially with how quick information spreads across the internet. Everybody has a phone in their pocket now. They get notifications all the time. So it's hard to keep the public not aware of what's going on. And I don't think that they should be. I don't think they should be hiding information from the public. But it's clear that something needs to change, whether that is Americans' expectations for what is getting done needs to change, which I don't think that should be the case. I think that Americans should be getting what they want. But I do think that Americans' expectations for how those tasks are accomplished, how those goals are accomplished, needs to be brought more into alignment with reality, as opposed to just the fantasy land of, oh, I want this done, but I don't want, for like with deportations, I want all illegals deported, but I don't want Abuela deported. It's like, you can't have both. If you want a happy medium, then maybe we could work on that. But I think that we need to be realistic in our expectations, and I hope that most Americans actually get around to that. But one thing I do want to bring up, just for clarity, is that I know I brought up Michael Knowles' post in June of 2025, where it was a not pretty much a 90-10 issue on whether or not U.S. should strike Iran in favor of not going into war with Iran. He ran the same poll. This was February 27th, so just a little bit ago. This one has significantly more votes, so 251,420 votes. And this one is 50.8% said no, we shouldn't have struck Iran, whereas 49.2% said yes. And the reason I want to bring this up is because I wouldn't be surprised if leftists or liberals would bring this up in an argument and say, look, conservatives are a cult because they were all against it, but now that, because Michael Knowles is a conservative figure, if you don't know who he is a fairly big figure in the conservative movement. Now they're changing their mind because Trump said it, so therefore they're just going along with whatever Trump says. That's not true. I mean, there are certain individuals who act that way, and that's how they get their opinions, and I think that they're wrong for that. I'm sure you know who I'm talking about. You can see them on the internet. They're all over the place. But most conservatives don't think that way. The majority of us look at facts and make a decision on there. Like I've said over and over again, as long as this is a limited operation and we don't have boots on the ground, we get in, we get out, and we're prepared for any consequences that come, because I do believe that we may have a worse regime in power after we're done here, after we're done in Iran, as opposed to what was currently there. But we'll see. As long as we're prepared for that, I'm fine with it. And I want it to be limited. Like I said, giving them 8 weeks at most. After that, I'm going to start decreasing my support for it, because in reality, that's what we should be doing. Trump has by far one of the most successful foreign policies by a president, at least in my lifetime, certainly in my lifetime, but going back quite a bit. So I'm trusting him with this. Maybe he'll let me down, maybe he won't. I can't tell you that, because I can't tell the future, just like most of you can't either. So getting past that point, the left always says that MAGA and conservatives are a cult, which is so funny, because I love bringing up this study, this 2023 study, which handled, it's titled Attitude Networks as Intergroup Realities, using network modeling to research attitude, identity, relationships, and polarized political contexts. And the results of this study, which I'll put them up so you can see, were that Democrats they have less intellectual diversity amongst them compared to the conservative movement. And this is just logically, like you can logically come to this conclusion without this data. It is anecdotal, but if you actually take a look at this data, which proves that the anecdote was correct, then it's clear that you could see that the reason why this would be. And the primary reason is that in the Democrat Party, if you do not wholeheartedly believe in whatever the current thing is, like I know Dan Bongino calls it the current thingism, you will be excised from the Democrat Party, regardless of what that is. Whether that's abortion, if you're against abortion, you're out of the Democrat Party. If you're against men and women's sports, you're out of the Democrat Party. I mean, it's just ridiculous. And we've seen this time and time again with RFK Jr. He was a Democrat who then moved over to become a Republican because the Democrat Party pushed him out, because he was asking questions and he wasn't wholeheartedly in on all the leftist orthodoxy. We also had the same thing with Tulsi Gabbard. I mean, there's that. And I wouldn't be surprised if John Fetterman were either, one, primaried in his next, when he's up for election. I believe he's up for re-election in 28. I don't remember if he's 28 or 2030, but he still has a little bit left in his term. So I wouldn't be surprised if the left tried to primary him, because he's a fairly reasonable Democrat. He's definitely not a Republican, but he's a fairly reasonable Democrat, which generally doesn't exist anymore. It's just over and over again, you see all these things. And now we have the data for it. This is from 2023, that yes, there is very little intellectual diversity on the left because of what I said. If you don't wholeheartedly believe in everything that the left supports, you're excised from the movement. And this gets back to that clip I showed of William Masterson, where it's so easy to see this because you can literally predict what they're going to say before they say it. Like I said, I literally said that exactly what he was going to say the day before he said it. He went public and said it the day after I said it. It's when you are so predictable, it's clear that there is some higher structure that is influencing your beliefs, and that's why conservatives say that you're a cult, because you kind of are. You kick everybody out who doesn't believe the same stuff as you, and you just go along with whatever the head of the party says at any given moment. And that's not the way we should have society. You should be able to actually have these debates and debate policy. I mean, a lot of policy nowadays is absolutely ridiculous that we're even talking about. We should be talking about stuff like the economy, like how should we have higher marginal tax rates, lower marginal tax rates, stuff like that. All that stuff we should be talking about. We shouldn't be talking about men and women's sports, because that's absolutely absurd in the first place. We shouldn't be talking about whether or not people can just enter the country illegally. We also shouldn't be talking about people being taxed to oblivion because they have money. Like, I know one of the big things across the country now is a big push for the millionaire's tax, which is ridiculous because, and I do want to get into this a little bit right now. It wasn't in my notes, but I am going to talk about it. So the whole idea of a millionaire's tax is just absolutely insane on its face, because you're talking about a group of people who have a significant amount of money. If you attempt to tax them higher than the amount that they're willing to pay in taxes, which a lot of these millionaires' taxes would do, what happens is these people will say, why am I living here? I'm just going to move. So they move to another state and you lose out on all that tax revenue. So then what happens is, in order to maintain the current level of government funding that you have, in terms of, at this point in the state level, what you have to do is you have to increase taxes on the lower income people who voted you in to tax the higher income people. And that's what happens. And you basically breed poverty into your own state, because you aren't willing to actually work with companies or wealthy individuals and actually create policy that incentivizes them to create more wealth that you can take in taxes. Because a lot of people don't realize that tax percentage rates are there for a reason, because the more money you make, you may have the same percent, but that percent gives you more money the more money that individual is making. So it's something that I really can't believe that people fall for this all the time, but it just doesn't work on its face. But getting back to the point that the left is a cult, NBC actually did a study that I thought was, or a poll, I'm sorry, it's not a study, that I thought was absolutely hilarious, because not only did they intentionally change the title in a way that obstructs or obfuscates what the actual results of the poll show, but it still doesn't prove their point in a way that they think it does. So, title of this article is Poll, Primary Voters Prize Ideology Over Electability as Their Parties Get Low Marks. So, based on that, it sounds like both parties are more focused on getting people elected, or I'm sorry, they're more concerned about people having the same ideals as them over whether or not they can easily be elected. Which, if you look at the results, which I'll put up now, you can see that Republicans that's actually true for. Republicans, we have 70% of Republicans say that they want to vote for somebody who is closest to their views, and only 27% are willing to, or actually want to support somebody that they believe would beat the other party in the actual elections. As opposed to Democrats, only 56% say that they want to vote for somebody who's similar to them in their beliefs, and 42% want whoever can beat the other candidate, which shows that they don't particularly care what the candidate believes. At least it's about 50-50. So it's I guess it's slightly outside of the margin of error, because margin of error is plus or minus 5.1 and 5.5 percentage points. So it is slightly out of margin of error, but regardless, this is still almost a 50-50 issue in terms of whether or not a Democrat would rather support somebody that actually believes in the same stuff as them, as opposed to somebody who they believe can be elected. Like that right there on its face indicates that yes, Democrats are willing to put aside their values just because they it's vote blue no matter who, which it's such a joke. I mean, you should be voting for people who actually you believe in and who will represent you the way that you want to be represented, and not necessarily what you're getting. And this is best indicated by what's going on in the Senate right now, and particularly among Democrats, because this poll actually goes in and gives out the net approval ratings for various public figures and political parties across the country. So if we look at this, we have Trump, net approval is negative 12. Republicans as a whole is negative 14. So obviously it's negative. That's not good. Obviously, so the way this is calculated is you range between, I believe it's plus 100 and minus 100. So the worst you can get is a minus one, or minus 100, because you could get a 0 on the net approval and a negative 100 in disapproval. So worst you can get is negative 100. The best you can get is a 100. So this is below average. Trump is negative 12. Republicans as a whole, negative 14. JD Vance is at negative 11. Marco Rubio is at negative 7. And obviously these are important because these are the two presumptive candidates for the next presidential election. Nobody particularly knows which one is going to be president and which one is going to be vice president. I personally lean more towards JD being president and Marco being vice president, but that may change between now and then. There's a lot of indicators that Marco Rubio is actually doing such a great job that he's increasing his favorability. So we'll see. But right now, that's not much to say about that. So obviously, that's kind of the Republican roster. Now we're going to look at who the presumptive Democrat candidates are. So we have Kamala Harris polling at negative 17. So it's worse than just the Republican Party itself, which is the worst of the Republican ratings right now. We have Gavin Newsom polling at negative 22, which is, again, even worse than Kamala Harris. And Kamala Harris got crushed, politically crushed in the 2024 election. We have AOC. She's actually the best chance for the Democrats right now. So she's at negative 11. So she's tied with JD Vance in terms of unpopularity, which is surprising. So I wouldn't be surprised if we saw an AOC JD Vance debate, at least a debate. I don't know if she will secure the nominee or if JD will. I presume that they will, just based on current popularity. But like I said, things change in politics. It could be their era of politics could be over tomorrow. We don't really know. So those are all the front runners. And then we have Democrats as a whole polling at negative 22. So they're polling at the same net approval rating as Gavin Newsom, which is pretty bad. There's almost a quarter in the negative. So we have all that. Then I do want to also include these in here just so you're aware of other areas of interest, which is ICE. It's at negative 18 approval rating. So not as bad as the Democrats. It's still worse than Kamala Harris, though. Kamala Harris is pretty bad. So ICE is at negative 18. And then, ironically, sanctuary cities, which is a largely Democrat policy, is polling at negative 10, which is one of the highest rated, has the highest net approval ratings of the items in this list. The only thing that's actually, the only person who has a higher approval rating than that is Marco Rubio with a net approval rating at negative 7. So Marco's doing a great job. Apparently sanctuary cities are doing a great job. I don't think so, but I don't know. But by far, the biggest indicator of popular sentiment in this country is that Iran is at negative 53 approval rating. So the two worst things in this poll, according to Americans, are the Democrat Party and then Iran. And I guess if you want to include Gavin Newsom, he's part of the Democrat Party, but he's rated the same as the Democrat Party itself. So yeah, Americans aren't too happy with the Democrat Party or Iran. They're obviously more unhappy with Iran, but I haven't been able to confirm. I believe that this is Iran as a country and like the regime in there. I don't believe that it's the Iran conflict because they would have specified that. But it's pretty telling. And that's why I'm hesitant to believe all the people saying that Democrats are going to crush this election because they're just so unpopular. I wouldn't be surprised because historic trends tend to indicate that the opposing party would win the midterms when a government is constructed by a unified party. But we'll see. I would love it if we could buck that trend this year. We'll see. But one thing that Republicans need to do to actually ensure that our elections happen and only citizens are voting in them and they go smoothly is we need to pass the Save America Act. And I got some heat about this the other day. I believe I put it up yesterday where I was calling out both Republicans and Democrats for not voting for it when I put it up a few weeks ago. Polling indicates that it's a 70-30 issue. I believe it's 70-30 in the Democrat Party. Across all Americans, it's 80-20 in favor of the SAVE Act, which is funny because the Democrat senators are the ones who are resisting it wholeheartedly. There are some Republicans that are against it, which I think that we need to get them out of office, but that's how it is. And so I just want to go over some of the lies that people are telling you because I did actually read this bill, and I'll include it in my notes so you can actually go through and read it yourself. But this bill quite literally only makes it, you need to show proof of citizenship when you register to vote. So that's one part of it. And the second part of it is that states must routinely clean up their voter rolls and ensure that non-citizens are not registered to vote in their states. So that's fairly clear. One of the concerns that people have is that this is unconstitutional. And it's not. And I can read you right now where in the Constitution. It's Article 1, Section 4, Clause 1. The times, places, and manner of holding elections for senators and representatives shall be prescribed in each state by the legislature thereof. So if you just read that part, then you'd be correct. This would be unconstitutional. But there's a second part of this clause that goes, but the Congress may at any time, by law, make or alter such regulations, except as to the places of choosing senators. So this gives Congress the ability to implement regulations on federal elections. It's blatantly in there. So this isn't unconstitutional. This isn't crazy legal theory. This is reality. This is like, I don't know how you can spin this to make it unconstitutional unless you just ignore parts of the Constitution, which I know that a lot of leftists do. They like picking and choosing what's actually pertinent to them and then throwing out the rest, but you can't do that. You have to take it all together. So no, this isn't unconstitutional. The next concern is that this is going to eliminate women voters, and that's just not true because the concern initially was that if you were married and you had changed your last name, you wouldn't be able to register to vote because your last name would be different than on your birth certificate, which was required. And in the current version of the bill that is before the Senate, that is actually not in there. So you are required to show a birth certificate is one of the valid forms of proving that you are a citizen of the United States. But they also include a provision in there that says that states need to provide alternative measures for individuals to validate their proof of citizenship without necessarily having those documents. So there is actually a carve out for these people who don't necessarily have access to the necessary information to prove that they're a citizen. And some of them, I'm not going to go through all of them. You can look up the bill yourself. But some of them are literally just, if you get validated through, I believe it's called SAVE, also. I don't remember what it stands for, but it's the DHS list of all illegal immigrants in the country. So you can validate your citizenship there. That's one of the options. But pretty much they give the states unilateral authority to allow people to still be registered to vote so long as they pass certain checks, in particular in regards to whether or not they're in a illegal alien database, which isn't hard to do because if you're not an illegal alien, you won't be in there. And if you are an illegal alien, there's actually a chance that you aren't going to be in there. So even that, I think, isn't going far enough. But I completely understand why they're doing it, because this is a concern. And I do think that we need to allow these women to vote. So we got to make sure that that's in there. But there was that lie. Another lie is that this doesn't impact anybody. So why are we even going to pass it? And my question would be, well, if it's not going to impact anybody, then what's the harm in passing it? Because I mean, legitimately, what is if you're saying that we don't have any fraud or we have minimal fraud and that this bill isn't going to change anything about that, or I'm sorry, that we shouldn't be passing this bill because there isn't any fraud, then what's the harm in passing it? If there isn't any fraud, then there's still going to be no fraud. Or if there's minimal fraud, there may even be less fraud. So what's the problem? Like, all of these arguments crumble when given even the slightest amount of examination. The other thing too, and I do think that this is a somewhat fair point. I'm not going to call it a lie because I do believe that would be mislabeling it. But the idea that this is a poll tax, it's not. I do believe that we should be allowing individuals to get initial copies of their identification, so proof of citizenship, whether that be a birth certificate or whatever documents you need for that. You should be able to get for free the first time you get it. After that, if you misplace it or if you lose it, I don't have a problem with the government charging you for that to recreate it, because you were given it free, and it costs resources to develop that in the first place. So I don't have a problem with that. But it certainly isn't a poll tax if that were the case, because if you kept it properly and had the responsibility to actually maintain that and ensure that you knew where it was, then you would have gotten it for free. So I think that's questionable. I would like to see that point a bit better addressed by the bill. By, like I said, if the first document that you get is free, and then after that it's paid, that's fine. But in general, I don't have a problem with that. So it's just ridiculous. And then one other thing that I do want to bring up, because this was another thing that I got a bunch of heat on, was Chuck Schumer actually this past week had a viral clip, and I'll play it now.
Yes, but their bill isn't voter ID, number one. It is about voter registration. It allows ICE to kick tens of millions of people off the rolls, and they don't tell them until Election Day, and you show up and you say, you're not registered anymore. You're not registered here. You're not on the rolls.
So in this clip, you can see he says that there are it's either millions or billions. I'm going to give him the benefit of the doubt and assume he said millions. It's hard to tell, but like I said, I'll give him the benefit of the doubt. Tens of millions of people will be kicked off these voter rolls by ICE. So, and I love the libs who come after me and say, oh, no, this doesn't imply anything. Well, if ICE, which stands for Immigration and Customs Enforcement, is kicking them off the voter rolls, then that implies that there are tens of millions of illegals on those voter rolls, which also means that because being a non-citizen and registering to vote is illegal under current statutes. This also means that there are tens of millions of people who are illegally registered to vote, and they should be charged and prosecuted under our current statutes. Which means, and I didn't say this, so if you want to criticize me for this part, then that's fine. But that means that either Chuck Schumer was lying that tens of millions of people will be kicked off by ICE with the passage of this bill, or there are tens of millions of illegal aliens already registered to vote across the country, and they should be kicked off our voter rolls. Like, you aren't winning any arguments by saying that that's not true, because there's no other rational way of viewing that, especially because he specified ICE. If you wanted to say like the government was kicking them off, or Congress, or Republicans, then that's a little bit more plausible. But saying that ICE, like I said, stands for Immigration and Customs Enforcement, they're the ones deporting illegals from this country. And you're going to say that they're kicking you off the voter rolls, and you don't expect the implication to be that it is illegals on the voter roll? Like, it's just insane. But good news is that Thune is bringing it to a vote. Unfortunately, it's going to get shut down because he's not making any changes to the filibuster, which is ridiculous. I understand some of the reasons why, but in reality, we know Democrats have called for it over and over again to kill the filibuster. They want it gone, only when they're in power, but they want it gone. So I don't have a problem with us removing it. But what I do think, and I give credit to Jeremy Boring about this from the Daily Wire, I don't recall exactly when it was. I want to say it was like December-ish, November, December. But he had a good idea, I think. And as it's looking like we're not going to get the talking filibuster, which is literally just the filibuster as it was meant to be, which allows for debate on topics. Instead of that, what should happen is they should just put it to a floor vote. So make it so that way Democrats, so put up a resolution and you say, okay, we will either, if you vote in favor of this, we're going to permanently ensure that the filibuster is in place in the Senate, meaning that they cannot remove it as when the Democrats take in power. By doing that, they can basically get Democrats on the record saying that either, yes, we are going to permanently keep the filibuster, or no, we are going to, we don't want that, in which case the Republicans shouldn't feel bad about removing it. And I think that's a good policy, and I think that's something that Thune needs to do, because we know that this bill isn't going to get passed, and then what's going to happen is the Republican senators are going to say, oh, we tried, but there's not enough support, despite the fact that, like I said, in America, this is an 80-20 issue. 80% of Americans support this, and our representatives aren't representing us. And to me, it doesn't matter what party you are. It seems like if you are against this stuff, you believe that you will at least benefit from some or any of the fraud that happens in the absence of this bill. So you can disagree with me all you want, but that's what the indication is to me. But speaking of fraudulent elections, one big thing that actually came out this week that almost nobody reported on was that there was a secret seizure of election records in Maricopa County, Arizona earlier this week. So the FBI went in. I don't recall exactly when. I can see that this article was published on March 8th, but there aren't any dates included in here. But they went in, and this is based on anonymous sources because obviously this is a sensitive situation. But this is in furtherance of the warrant that was given, that basically allowed the FBI to investigate the ballots in Fulton County, Georgia, which these are all the areas where there was believed to be significant fraud in the 2020 election. If you want to say that this is Trump being vindictive, then go ahead. I tend to lean against that just because, first of all, the election results in 2020 were suspicious. Whether or not you want to say that he was cheated out of the election, I think that's a fair assessment because regardless of any fraud that occurred, it was illegal for at least Pennsylvania and several other states to change their election laws the way that they did, because the election process must go through the state legislature, and a lot of these were done via executive orders. So that on its face is illegal and unconstitutional, and that should have allowed at least some sort of questioning of the election, but they didn't. All the cases that were brought up against this were dismissed either for lack of standing, because at the time nobody was impacted because Biden hadn't become president yet, or after Biden had become president, it was moot because Biden was president. So I think it's good that we're at least exposing some of this. If there was nothing, then there's nothing. But I don't have a problem with this, especially because this was recent. This was a grand jury of people issued the subpoena. I know that grand juries, that it's so easy to get a grand jury to issue a subpoena. So I'm not going to say that that's a huge thing, but it wasn't just the Trump administration going in. They actually got a subpoena to go in. They're gathering the information. I'm hoping that they publicize this soon, so that way other people can actually see that there was or wasn't fraud, because then we can set this all to rest. We'll officially know whether or not the 2020 election was rigged, cheated, stolen, whatever you want to say. But one thing that I do think is funny is because obviously one of the biggest concerns with fraud is the mail-in ballots, which Democrats seem to love and Republicans seem to hate, which this wasn't always the way it used to be. Because in 2012, there's this article from the New York Times, as more vote by mail, or I'm sorry, I'm reading the link. It's error and fraud at issue as absentee voting rises. And this is just hilarious to me because obviously, like I said, Democrats in recent years have come out vastly in favor of it, but they weren't always this way. So let me just read this excerpt from the New York Times back in 2012. Yet votes cast by mail are less likely to be counted, more likely to be compromised, and more likely to be contested than those cast in a voting booth, statistics show. Election officials reject almost 2% of ballots cast by mail, double the rate for in-person voting. The more people you force to vote by mail, Mr. Sancher said, the more invalid ballots you will generate. Election experts say the challenges created by mailed ballots could well affect outcomes this fall and beyond. If the contests next month are close enough to be within what election lawyers call the margin of litigation, the grounds on which they will be fought will not be hanging chads, but ballots cast away from the voting booth. So, New York Times called this in 2012 and then conveniently stayed silent about it when it benefited Trump in 2020, these claims. So it's been documented that it's a problem. Like I said, if you have questions about it, that's fine. But this is literally, they've been saying this for years prior to Trump's questioning. But all of a sudden, Trump questions it, and that's it. It's instantly wrong. But let's get past that. Another big news story of the week was that there's more Epstein testimony coming out. So Richard Kahn, he was Epstein's accountant. He'll be testifying to Congress next Wednesday, I believe. So far, he's basically said that he didn't know anything. Just double checking. Oh no, so it was March 11th. I'm sorry, I thought I heard rumors that this was going on next week, but it looks like he was there this week. Pretty much nothing came out of it. Like I said, most of this Epstein stuff we either already knew or we already suspected, and there's not going to be much coming out of this. Just my personal take on it. But one big thing that a lot of people latched onto, which again, I don't think anything's going to come of it, was that there was one of Epstein's prison guards searched for his name, like looking for headlines regarding him, the morning of his death. And then she also, I believe, received a huge amount of funds in her bank account soon after. So it's definitely suspicious. But like I said, I highly doubt that there's going to be any information that comes out of it. But we'll see. Maybe I'm wrong. I kind of hope I'm wrong, but I doubt it based on the way things have been going for years regarding this situation. But we'll see. That being said, that's the end of tonight's episode. I hope you enjoyed it. Like I said, this is my first live or public episode on the week that it's actually releasing. So if you like what I do here, I'd love it if you like and subscribe. You can find me on social media just about anywhere. And I hope you have a good night.